Shocking a royal guard for laughs. What followed left everyone speechless. Jake had always been the kind of person who loved attention. Whether it was making his friends laugh during class or pulling harmless pranks on his cousins during family gatherings, he believed that humor could light up any moment. At 19 years old, with energy to burn and a phone full of silly videos, he was excited to see the world, and maybe make a few viral clips along the way. That summer, Jake and his three closest friends, Mark, Adam, and Noah, set out on their first big trip across Europe. They had been saving for nearly a year, working part-time jobs and skipping weekend outings just to make this dream come true. London was one of their first stops. They had heard about the weather, the accents, the double-decker buses, and of course, the Queen's Guards, those silent, stone-faced soldiers who stood in bright red coats and tall black hats in front of royal buildings. Jake had seen videos before. Tourists would try to make the guards smile or react, but they rarely succeeded. The guards were known for their discipline, their serious expressions, and their complete lack of reaction, no matter what people did in front of them. This fascinated Jake. It also gave him an idea. "Guys," Jake said, nudging his friends as they stood near the gates of Buckingham Palace, "what if I made one of them move? Just a little prank, nothing bad, just for fun." Mark rolled his eyes. "You can't make those guys move. They're trained not to," Jake smirked. Challenge accepted. The crowd around them was large that day. Tourists from all over the world were snapping photos, recording videos, and whispering to each other as they admired the majestic building and the tall, unmoving guards. Jake noticed how people would laugh and pose, but no one dared to get too close. There were signs, too, asking people to respect the space and avoid physical contact. But Jake wasn't planning to touch anyone, just make them laugh. Okay, Jake said, pulling something from his backpack. It was a rubber snake, the kind used for Halloween decorations. "Let's see how brave they really are." His friends exchanged uneasy looks. They had gotten used to Jake's jokes over the years, but this felt different. The guards weren't actors, they weren't street performers, they were soldiers after all. Still, Adam pulled out his phone. "I mean, it could be funny." With the phone recording, Jake stepped forward. The guard in front of him was tall, still as a statue, and staring straight ahead. Jake waved his hand slightly, trying to get a reaction. Nothing. He clapped. Still nothing. Then, with a grin, Jake dropped the rubber snake onto the ground in front of the guard, pretending it had slithered across the pavement. He gasped loudly, jumped back, and pointed at it as if it were real. "Whoa, look out!" Jake shouted, half laughing. A few people in the crowd turned their heads. Some even giggled, unsure if the snake was real or not. But the guard didn't move. His eyes didn't shift. His arms stayed by his sides, fingers curled tightly around the handle of his weapon. Jake wasn't done yet. He took one step closer, too close perhaps, and nudged the snake with his foot, sliding it near the guard's shiny black shoes. He leaned forward slightly, pretending to be scared, and raised his hands in mock panic. And then it happened. The guard shifted. In a single, sharp movement, the soldier raised his foot, stepped back with precision, and shouted in a strong, commanding voice. "Step back from the Queen's Guard!" The words echoed loudly through the courtyard. For a split second, everything froze. The laughter stopped. Cameras dropped. The once buzzing crowd went silent. Jake's face turned pale. His friends stopped filming. "I didn't touch him," Jake muttered, stepping back, his hands raised. "It was just a joke," but the moment had already passed into something else. Two nearby officers, dressed in dark uniforms and watching the crowd from a short distance, began walking briskly toward Jake. One had a radio in his hand. The other had a serious look on his face. "You there, step aside," the officer said calmly but firmly. Jake looked around, confused. He hadn't expected any of this. He thought maybe the guard would smile or at most give him a warning look. He didn't think it would turn into something serious. "It was just a prank," he tried to explain. "I didn't mean any harm." But the officer didn't seem amused. The guards remained in place, undisturbed and back in formation, while Jake was gently but firmly guided away from the crowd. His friends followed, trying to explain that it was harmless. One of them even showed the rubber snake, dangling it by the tail as if to prove it was a toy. The officers didn't raise their voices. They didn't put Jake in handcuffs, but they did lead him through a side gate and into a small security room near the palace grounds. The air inside was cool and quiet. There were no windows, just a few chairs, a desk, and a pair of security monitors showing views from outside. Jake sat down, still holding the snake in his hand. "Let us be clear," said the officer who had spoken earlier. He was older, maybe in his late 40s, and spoke with calm authority. "The Royal Guards are not here for entertainment. They are trained soldiers. Tampering with them, distracting them, or crossing their boundary is not just inappropriate, it's a violation." Jake swallowed hard. He didn't feel like laughing anymore. "I didn't touch him," he said quietly. "I didn't think it would be taken seriously." The officer nodded slowly. "You may not have touched him, but you crossed a line. There are strict rules in place for everyone's safety, yours included." Jake's mind raced. Was he going to be arrested? Would he be sent home early? Would this go on his record? Outside, the crowd had returned to its usual rhythm. Another group of tourists gathered in front of the palace. More cameras came out. More photos were taken. No one knew that a teenager was sitting just a few yards away, realizing that his funny idea had turned into a serious matter. Back in the room, Jake was asked for his passport. He handed it over with trembling fingers. One of the officers took it, made a few notes, and then walked out of the room. Another few minutes passed. They felt like hours. Jake sat quietly, the rubber snake now on the floor beside him. His friends waited outside, unsure of what to say or do. Finally, the older officer returned. "You're not under arrest," he said, to Jake's relief. "But your information has been logged. You'll receive a formal warning. If you attempt something similar again during your stay, the consequences will be much more serious." Jake nodded. He didn't argue, he didn't joke. The officer paused before opening the door. "You may think it was all in fun," he said gently, "but imagine if a real threat came through and the guard was distracted. They have a job to do and they take it seriously. You should too." Jake stood up, thanked the officer quietly, and walked out. His friends were waiting, a mix of worried and relieved. "Man," Noah said, shaking his head. "That got real fast." Jake didn't respond. He picked up the rubber snake from the floor and slipped it into his backpack. They walked away from the palace slowly, their earlier excitement replaced with silence. Jake looked back once, watching the guards as they continued to stand motionless, unchanged, unwavering. It was as if nothing had happened, but for Jake, everything had. He wasn't proud of the prank anymore. It hadn't been clever, it hadn't been funny, and it almost cost him far more than he expected. What started as a moment for laughs turned into a lesson he wouldn't forget. Jake walked down the street, away from Buckingham Palace, his hands in his pockets and his thoughts spinning faster than ever. His friends walked beside him, but no one said much. There were no jokes. No teasing, no laughter, just the soft sound of footsteps and the occasional car driving by. He kept hearing the guard's voice in his head. "Step back from the Queen's Guard." It was loud and sharp, not angry, but powerful. He had never expected that. It was supposed to be a small joke, a silly moment to post online, something to show people back home and maybe even go viral. But now, Jake wasn't sure he wanted anyone to see it at all. They finally stopped at a bench in a nearby park. The green trees and quiet atmosphere felt like a different world compared to the palace gates. Jake dropped onto the bench and stared at the ground. Mark sat next to him and gave him a small nudge. "You okay, man?" Jake nodded slowly but didn't look up. "Yeah, I just didn't think it would go that far." Noah, usually the quiet one, spoke next. "I mean, it wasn't the worst thing you've done, but yeah, this one kinda crossed a line." Jake sighed. "It was just a toy, a rubber snake. I didn't even touch the guy. I didn't mean any harm." "But that's the thing," Adam said, sitting on the grass nearby. "To them, it doesn't matter if it's a toy or not. They're trained to be serious. Their job isn't to entertain. They're guarding something important." Jake knew they were right. Deep down, even before the guard shouted at him, he had felt a little unsure. When he stepped that close, when the crowd got quiet for a moment, he had felt it in his gut. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea. But he had pushed that feeling away, because he wanted to be funny. He wanted the views, the laughs, the shares. That's what everyone did now, right? Play a prank, post a video, and watch the likes come in. Only this time it hadn't gone that way. "What if they had arrested me?" Jake asked out loud, still looking down. "What if I couldn't leave the country or something?" "You got lucky," Mark replied honestly. "They gave you a warning, but I don't think they would have laughed if it happened again." The boys sat in silence for a while. People walked by, enjoying the sunny day. Children played in the distance. A man fed ducks near the pond. Life continued, even though Jake felt like he had hit a pause button in his own. Later that evening, they returned to their small hotel room. It wasn't fancy, just 2 beds, a shared bathroom, and a tiny table, but it was enough for the trip. Jake laid on one bed and stared at the ceiling. His backpack was in the corner, the rubber snake still inside. He didn't want to touch it. Mark plugged his phone into the charger. "Hey, about the video." Jake turned his head. "What about it?" "I deleted the one I took, just didn't feel right." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Thanks, I don't want anyone to see it." That night, sleep didn't come easily. Jake kept thinking about the officer's words. "They have a job to do and they take it seriously. You should too." It stuck with him, not because it was harsh, but because it was true. The next morning, they planned to visit the Tower of London, take some river photos, and grab a classic English breakfast somewhere. But something was different now. The mood was softer. Jake wasn't bouncing with energy like usual. He was quieter, more thoughtful. While they walked through the historic stone walls of the tower, Jake listened more closely to the guides. He looked at the old armor, the swords, the crowns. He read the signs with more attention. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was something new, a growing respect for the history and culture of a place he barely knew. Later, while standing near the river, Jake turned to his friends. "I want to write about it." They looked at him curiously. "Write what?" Adam asked. "The whole thing," Jake said. "What happened yesterday, not like a funny post, but a real story, how I messed up, what I learned." Noah raised an eyebrow. "You serious?" Jake nodded. "Yeah. I think it could help people. Not to do what I did." That night, back in the hotel room, Jake pulled out his phone and opened a writing app. The screen glowed in the dim light as he typed slowly. "I thought making a Royal Guard laugh would be funny. I thought I'd get a good video and some internet fame. But I ended up learning something much more important." He kept typing, pouring his thoughts out without trying to sound clever. He wrote about the moment, the mistake, the feeling when the guard shouted, and the silence that followed. He wrote about how afraid he felt when the officers pulled him aside and how much he respected their calm and firm way of handling it. He even wrote about the rubber snake. By the time he finished, it wasn't a story about a prank anymore. It was about a person realizing that not everything is meant to be funny and that some things deserve silence and respect. When he showed it to his friends the next morning, they were surprised. "Wow," Mark said, scrolling through the screen. "This is actually good." Jake smiled just a little. "Think I should post it?" Adam nodded. "Yeah, but not on your prank channel. Put it on your regular account. Let people see the real you for once." So Jake did. He posted the story with a simple caption. Then by friends of friends, then by strangers. Some people thanked him for being honest. Others shared their own stories of travel mistakes and what they learned. A few even said they had once tried to make the guards laugh too, but after reading Jake's post, they saw it differently now. Jake didn't feel famous, he didn't feel cool, but he felt lighter, like he had fixed a part of what went wrong. He never pulled another prank during the rest of their Europe trip. Instead, he started recording little videos of interesting facts, beautiful places, quiet moments. His content changed. He was still funny, still himself, but there was something new, awareness, growth. His friends noticed too. "You're kind of like a new Jake," Noah said one day while they sat at a cafe in Paris. "Still a clown, but like a wise clown," Jake laughed. "I'll take that." They all laughed together this time. Not because someone was embarrassed or caught doing something silly, but because they were enjoying the moment. No cameras, no plans, just being there. And that, Jake thought, was the real reason they came on this trip. Not for the jokes, not for the videos, but to see the world. To learn from it, and to return home a little different from how they left. After Paris, Jake and his friends traveled to Rome. The streets were full of life. Musicians played near fountains, the smell of pizza filled the air, and the sound of scooters zipping by was everywhere. Tourists laughed, posed for pictures, and walked around with gelato in hand. The city was full of charm, and the group was excited to explore every corner. But even as Jake enjoyed the sights, something inside him had changed. He wasn't just thinking about making funny videos anymore. He wanted to really see the places he visited, not just through a camera lens. The memory of what happened in London still stayed with him, like a quiet voice reminding him to slow down and think before acting. One afternoon, while they were visiting the Colosseum, the boys took a break in the shade. It was a hot day, and they had been walking for hours. As they sat on a low stone wall sipping cold water, Jake saw a small group of kids trying to climb over a rope that blocked off a section of ancient ruins. A security guard nearby rushed over, gently asked them to come down, and explained why it wasn't allowed. Jake watched carefully. The kids looked embarrassed, but the guard was calm, not angry. He used kind words. The parents nodded and apologized. The moment passed quickly, but it stuck with Jake. "That's how you do it," Jake said to himself quietly. Mark overheard. "What?" "Nothing," Jake replied with a small smile. "Just thinking." Later that night, as they sat in their hotel room looking through photos, Jake scrolled past the ones they had taken near Buckingham Palace. There was one photo where he stood a few feet from the guard, right before the prank. His body was angled forward, holding the rubber snake, his mouth open mid-laugh. He stared at the picture. "I look like a little kid trying to get in trouble," Jake said. His friends looked over. "You looked excited," Noah said with a shrug. "But yeah, maybe a little too much." Jake shook his head. "It's not just that. I was so focused on the joke, I didn't even think about what it meant. That guard probably has a family. He has a job, and he was just doing it. And I treated him like a prop in a comedy skit." The room fell quiet. They could tell Jake wasn't trying to sound dramatic. He really meant it. Adam nodded slowly. "We've all done dumb stuff, Jake. At least you learned from it." Jake appreciated that. But the feeling inside him wasn't just about learning. It was about doing something better next time. The next day, they joined a walking tour of the Vatican. The guide was a woman named Elena. She had a gentle voice but spoke with passion. She told stories of the artists who painted the ceilings, the popes who once walked the halls, and the quiet meanings behind the smallest details. Jake listened more than he ever had on any tour before. He asked questions. He took notes. He didn't care if it made him look nerdy. He wanted to remember everything. After the tour, Elena approached him. "You ask good questions," she said with a smile. Jake smiled back. "I used to care more about funny videos, but now I'm trying to pay attention." Elena nodded. "That's a good change." Travel isn't just about seeing places. It's about letting those places change how you see the world. Jake liked that. He wrote it down later in his notes. Let places change how you see the world. That evening, while the group had dinner near the Spanish Steps, Jake saw a group of teenagers at a nearby table taking selfies. One of them tried to climb onto a statue to pose, but a waiter quickly came over and asked them to step down. The group laughed and rolled their eyes, clearly not taking it seriously. Jake looked at his friends. "That could have been me. 2 weeks ago, I would have done the same thing." "You're becoming a philosopher," Mark joked. Jake chuckled. "Maybe. Or maybe I just don't want to be that guy anymore." The next few days in Rome were filled with peaceful moments. Sunsets over ancient ruins, long walks through quiet streets, friendly conversations with shopkeepers. Jake was surprised by how good it felt to enjoy these things without trying to turn them into a joke. He didn't need a camera to prove he was having fun. He was having fun, real fun. One night back in the hotel, Jake picked up his phone and checked the post he had written back in London. It had more views than he expected, hundreds of comments, people thanking him for being honest. A few even said they had shared the post with their kids to teach them about respect. Jake didn't know how to feel. Proud? Maybe, but more than that, he felt responsible. If people were listening to his story, maybe he could do more with it. He opened a new note and started writing again. This time, it wasn't just about what he did wrong. It was about what he was starting to do right. "I used to travel just to say I'd been places. Now I travel to understand them. I used to film moments to get laughs. Now I try to live them, even the quiet ones." He kept writing for an hour, and for the first time, his phone wasn't a tool for entertainment. It was a place to collect real thoughts. The following day, the group packed up and headed for their next destination, Barcelona. The train ride was long, but it gave them time to rest. Jake sat by the window, watching the hills and villages pass by. He wore earbuds, but no music was playing. He was thinking again. When they arrived in Barcelona, the city greeted them with colorful buildings, street performers, and the sound of the ocean in the distance. Their hotel was near a busy square, and they could hear music every evening from their window. On their second night, they visited a famous street known for its lively energy. As they walked, they saw a performer dressed like a statue, painted head to toe in silver, standing completely still on a small platform. Every now and then, someone would drop a coin into a jar, and the performer would move slightly, tipping his hat or offering a slow-motion wave. A group of tourists approached, giggling. One of them clapped loudly near the performer's ear. Another waved a scarf in front of his face. The performer didn't move. Jake watched quietly. His chest tightened. He stepped forward and dropped a small coin in the jar. The performer nodded slowly in thanks. Jake gave a small smile, then turned back to his friends. They don't get enough credit, he said. Mark nodded. Most people think it's just a costume. Jake shook his head. Takes real strength to stand still when the world is testing you. Later that night, as the group shared snacks on a balcony, Jake looked up at the stars. He thought about the guard in London, the way he stood, silent and proud, the way he protected something without needing to say much. Jake wondered what kind of life that man had. Did he go home to a family? Did he laugh with friends when his shift ended? Did he even remember the silly kid with the rubber snake? Jake didn't know, but he hoped somehow that the guard would know that the silly kid had grown up a little since then. The world felt bigger now, not just full of places, but full of people, stories, and meaning. And Jake was starting to understand that traveling wasn't about the photos you brought home, it was about the changes you brought back in yourself. He hadn't meant to start a journey of growth. He just wanted laughs, but what he got was better, understanding. And the journey wasn't over yet. Barcelona brought with it warm breezes, bright colors, and music that filled the air. It was a city full of life, where every street felt like a story. Jake and his friends had already seen many places during their trip, but Barcelona felt special in a different way. It was full of energy, happy, welcoming, and calm all at the same time. On their third day in the city, they visited Park Güell, one of the most famous places in Barcelona. The bright mosaic tiles, curved benches, and unique buildings made it feel like a dream. Jake walked slowly, taking in every shape and color. He had started to enjoy just looking, not always taking pictures or thinking about content. He was learning to be present. "Hey," Adam said, pointing to a quiet area with a beautiful view of the city, "let's sit here for a while." They all agreed, sitting on a curved bench under the shade of a tree. From there, they could see the rooftops of Barcelona stretching into the distance, with the sea shining beyond. It was peaceful. Jake leaned back, took a deep breath, and said, "You ever think about how much we miss when we try too hard to record everything?" Mark looked at him, raising an eyebrow. "This coming from the guy who once brought a tripod into a grocery store?" They laughed. Jake nodded. "Yeah, I know, I used to think everything had to be funny or turned into a post, but lately I like the quiet stuff more." Noah smiled. "That's growth, my friend." That night, as they walked along the beach, a crowd was gathered around a street musician playing a soft tune on a Spanish guitar. No flashing lights, no loudspeakers, just calm, steady music. People stood silently listening. Some closed their eyes, others swayed gently. Jake didn't record, he didn't take a picture, he just stood there, hands in his pockets, listening. His heart felt full. Later, back in their room, Jake opened his journal again, the one he had started after London. He wrote, "Some things are better when shared. But some are better when you just let them be, like music, or quiet, or the sound of waves hitting the sand. I used to be afraid of missing out if I didn't record it. Now I know sometimes you miss out by not being fully there." Their next stop was Amsterdam. It was cooler there, with canals running through the city and bicycles on every street. The group rented bikes and rode through quiet neighborhoods, over bridges, past cafes and bookstores. Jake felt like he was living inside a painting. One day, they stopped at a museum. It wasn't very big, but it told the story of a young girl who had written about her life during difficult times. Her name was Anne. The museum was silent. Visitors walked through slowly, reading her words, seeing the small room where she had once lived and written her diary. Jake was deeply moved. He read every word carefully. The writing was honest and powerful. There was no video, no special effects, just a girl's voice, still heard many years later. As they left the museum, Jake stayed quiet for a long time. His friends gave him space. They could see the visit had touched him. That evening, as the sun set over the canals, Jake sat on the edge of a wooden bridge and wrote in his journal again. Her words were simple, but they reached deep. "I used to think my voice only mattered if it was funny. But now I know that true stories, even quiet ones, can leave a mark." The next morning, while having breakfast at a small cafe, Jake got a message on his phone. It was from someone he didn't know. The person had read the story Jake posted after the Royal Guard incident. The message said, "Thank you for being honest. My son is a soldier. I wish more people understood what it means to stand quietly and serve. Your words made me cry in a good way." Jake read it twice. Then again, he sat still for a while, holding his phone in both hands. When he finally looked up, he told his friends, "I think I helped someone." Adam smiled. "I think you helped more than one." Jake felt proud, but not the kind of pride that came from applause or likes. It was a deeper feeling, a quiet kind of proud. The kind that didn't need to be shown off. Later that day, they visited a library built inside an old church. The tall windows let light pour in, casting warm glows across the wooden shelves. Jake walked through slowly, running his fingers over the spines of books. He stopped at a small table with a notebook where visitors could leave thoughts or quotes. He picked up the pen and wrote, "Be careful with your moments. One small action can make a big noise, for better or for worse. Use your moments kindly." After leaving the library, Jake felt lighter again, as if writing that one sentence had closed another chapter in his journey. On their final day in Amsterdam, the boys took a boat tour through the canals. As the boat gently floated past buildings and bridges, a soft voice from the speaker told the history of the city. Jake leaned back, watching birds fly overhead and small ripples form in the water. He thought about everything: London, the guard, the snake, the warning. Then Paris, Rome, Barcelona, and now here. Each place had taught him something. But more than the places, it was the people and the moments that had changed him. He hadn't planned for this. When the trip began, he just wanted to have fun, make his friends laugh, and create videos. Now he was leaving with something far more meaningful. He opened his journal one last time during the trip and wrote, "Growth doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes with silence, with stillness, with learning when to be quiet and when to speak. I stepped too close to a man doing his job. I thought I was being funny, but what I found was a door, and I stepped through it." The next day, they were at the airport. Their bags were packed, souvenirs tucked away, and memories held close. As they waited at the gate, Jake looked out at the planes on the runway. "You think we'll be different when we go home?" he asked. Mark thought for a moment. "Maybe. But even if the world looks the same, we'll see it differently." Jake liked that. On the plane, as the clouds passed by the window, Jake closed his eyes, not to sleep but to remember. And as the plane flew home, he carried more than luggage. He carried stories, lessons, and a heart a little wiser than before. The plane landed with a soft bump on the runway. Outside the window, the airport looked familiar: gray roads, airport vehicles moving about, and passengers walking briskly. Jake stared at the view for a long moment. Home. After all the cities, the trains, the museums, and the moments that had changed him, he was finally back. The air inside the terminal felt different, not because it was colder or warmer, but because something inside Jake had shifted. He walked beside his friends, his backpack on one shoulder and his mind still full of thoughts from the trip. They didn't talk much on the ride home. Everyone was tired. Mark leaned against the window of the taxi. Adam scrolled through photos. Noah hummed a song softly under his breath, but Jake just looked out at the city passing by. It was the same city he had left a few weeks ago, but he didn't feel like the same person who had left it. When Jake walked into his house, his mom wrapped him in a warm hug. "You're thinner," she said, laughing. "Didn't they feed you in Europe?" Jake laughed too. "They fed me well, I just moved around more." His dad gave him a pat on the back, then asked about the trip. His younger sister ran up and asked for souvenirs. The house was noisy in the way that felt like home. That night, when he was alone in his room, Jake unpacked slowly. He placed small items on his shelf: postcards, tickets, little keychains he had collected. He found the rubber snake still at the bottom of his backpack. He held it in his hand for a long time. It felt like a piece of his past, something that reminded him of a mistake, but also a moment that helped him grow. Instead of throwing it away, he placed it in a drawer and closed it gently. The next morning, Jake opened his laptop and reread the posts he had written during the trip. His words still felt real. He had meant every sentence. He thought about all the people who had read them, who had shared their own stories, who had thanked him for being honest. It made him realize that one voice, used the right way, could matter. School started again the following week. Jake walked through the hallways, seeing familiar faces and hearing familiar voices. Some students waved at him. A few even asked, "Hey, were you the guy who posted that story about the guard in London?" Jake nodded. "I liked it," one of them said. "It made me think." That small sentence made Jake feel more proud than any video he had ever posted before. During his free period, Jake visited the library. He sat near the window, the same spot he used to sit in months ago when he edited funny videos or scrolled through social media. But now he opened a blank document and began typing something new. He titled it. He wrote about the moment at Buckingham Palace. He wrote about how he had been focused on making people laugh and how that moment changed everything. He wrote about the way the guard shouted, how it made him freeze, and how the silence afterward was louder than any noise he had ever heard. Then he wrote about the cities he visited after that, the calm of Rome, the warmth of Barcelona, the quiet strength he felt in Amsterdam. He wrote about how each place gave him a new piece of himself, and how slowly he became more aware of the world around him. When he was done, the short essay had become a full story. He printed it out and gave it to his English teacher the next day. She read it silently, then looked up with a smile. "This is powerful, Jake. Would you like to read it during the next school assembly?" Jake paused. He had never liked standing in front of a crowd unless it was to tell a joke, but this time it felt different. He nodded. "Yeah, I think I'd like that." The day of the assembly, the gym was full of students. The air buzzed with quiet talking and the sound of footsteps on the bleachers. When Jake's name was called, he walked to the microphone, his paper shaking slightly in his hands. But when he began to read, his voice grew steady. He didn't add jokes. He didn't try to make it funny. He just read his truth. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then came the applause, not loud or wild, but steady, meaningful. A few students stood up. Some nodded. One teacher wiped away a small tear. Afterwards, several students approached him. "I do silly stuff for likes too," one said. "But after hearing you, I think I'll stop and think next time." Another added, "Thanks for showing that it's okay to mess up as long as you learn." Jake smiled at each of them, not because he felt proud, but because he felt connected. His story wasn't just his anymore. It was a reminder for others too. That weekend, Jake was invited to speak at a local youth club. A counselor there had read his essay and thought his experience could help teenagers understand the importance of respect, choices, and learning from mistakes. Jake agreed. He stood in front of a smaller group this time. Some kids listened closely. Some looked down at their phones. But as Jake spoke, more and more heads lifted. Eyes met his. Even the quietest kids seemed to lean in by the end. He ended his talk with this: "We all want to be noticed. But being noticed doesn't mean being loud. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is listen, learn, and grow. I made a mistake, but it opened my eyes, and I hope my story helps open yours too." Later, as Jake walked home, the air felt cool and clear. He passed a small park where a few kids played near a bench. One of them had a toy sword and was pretending to be a guard. The others were trying to make him move. Jake stopped and watched for a moment. The child in the guard role stood tall and serious. The others laughed and jumped around, but the guard stayed firm. Jake smiled. He walked over and said gently, "You're good at standing still." The child grinned proudly. "I'm a guard." Jake knelt down. "Guards are brave, and they protect important things. Like buildings and respect." The kid nodded. "I won't move no matter what." Jake stood up. "That's the spirit." As he walked away, he thought about how far he had come. From a tourist with a prank in mind to someone who now understood what it meant to stand still, to be calm in a world that often moved too fast. The moment that had once left everyone speechless had become something greater. It had started with a joke and ended with a lesson. And that lesson had reached more people than Jake ever imagined. He knew he would still laugh in life, still have fun. But now his fun would come with thought, with care, and with heart, because the world wasn't just a place to be seen, it was a place to be respected. And sometimes, the biggest change starts with the smallest moment.